He got lost and was captured by an Apache woman tribe. Now their queen demands an heir. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a clear, crisp morning when Jackson Miller found himself hopelessly lost in the vast wilderness of the American West. The harsh winds of late autumn whipped through the barren landscape, and the towering mountain ridges seemed to rise up like giant walls, blocking any chance of finding his way home. A seasoned cowboy, Jackson had spent years navigating the unforgiving terrain of the frontier, but today, nothing seemed familiar. His horse was tired, and his canteen had long run dry. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the endless stretch of land, when he heard the sound of hooves approaching from behind. Before he could react, he was surrounded by a group of women on horseback, their faces painted with intricate designs, their eyes sharp and calculating. They spoke in a language he didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakably commanding. Jackson raised his hands in surrender, hoping they wouldn't consider him a threat. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The women didn't seem to care for his presence. They quickly bound his hands and led him toward their camp, the thudding of the horse's hooves echoing in his ears. The cold night air bit at his skin as they arrived at a secluded settlement tucked beneath a rocky cliff. Jackson could barely make out the outlines of tents and wooden structures, lit only by the flickering glow of campfires. He was roughly pulled off his horse and thrown to the ground before a group of tribal women gathered around him, their gazes piercing and filled with suspicion. He felt a shiver of fear run down his spine as he realized that this was no ordinary tribe. This was Apache territory, and these women were no ordinary warriors. In the center of the camp, a tall woman with a regal presence approached. Her face, painted with the same symbols as the others, radiated strength and authority. Her dark eyes locked onto Jackson with an intensity that made his heart race. She was their queen. Her voice was commanding as she spoke to the others, her words flowing with an unmistakable power. Jackson couldn't understand her language, but the tone left little doubt in his mind. He was in their hands now. The queen circled him, inspecting him as if he were nothing more than a specimen. She seemed to deliberate for a moment before turning to one of her warriors and giving an order. Jackson was dragged to a small fire where he was made to sit, his hands still bound. The women around him spoke in hushed voices, casting occasional glances his way. He could feel the weight of their stares, the scrutiny of his every movement. As the night wore on, Jackson's mind raced. What had he gotten himself into? These women were no mere bandits or outlaws. They were part of a powerful Apache tribe, and their queen had clearly taken an interest in him. He had no idea what fate awaited him here. The queen's presence loomed over him like a dark cloud, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far greater than he could have imagined. What would she do with him? What did they want from him? And most importantly, why had she chosen him of all people? Jackson's heart pounded as he realized that his journey through this desolate land had led him into the heart of a new and dangerous world. The woman who had captured him wasn't just a leader. She was a force of nature, and she wasn't about to let him go easily. The night was long and filled with whispers that Jackson couldn't quite understand. He sat by the fire, bound but not treated with outright cruelty. The Apache women watched him, their eyes full of mystery, as the queen observed from a distance. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the occasional murmur of the warriors. Jackson tried to make sense of the situation, his mind racing. Who were these people? Why had they captured him? And why was their queen so interested in him? He knew he had to be careful, but his thoughts were interrupted when the queen approached him, her steps deliberate and measured. She stood before him, tall and commanding, her eyes never leaving his. She spoke a few words in their language, but Jackson didn't understand. Instead of reacting with anger or fear, he simply stared back at her, trying to gauge what was going through her mind. After a long moment, she knelt down in front of him, lowering herself to his level, her gaze softening slightly. Jackson could feel the weight of her presence, and despite the situation, There was a certain calmness that settled over him. She extended her hand, and without thinking, he took it. The gesture felt like a strange act of trust, though he wasn't sure if it was his trust being given or hers. The queen said something more, her voice steady but firm, as if trying to communicate something important. She stood up, turning away from him and gesturing for him to follow. Jackson was still confused, but he had no choice. He followed her through the camp, past the warriors and the tents, into the heart of their settlement. It was a place of strong contrasts. On the one hand, the camp felt ancient and full of tradition, but there was also a sense of movement and life in the air, like something was about to change. They arrived at a large tent, where the queen stopped and turned to face him. She didn't speak immediately, but looked at him with a weight that was hard to ignore. Finally, she broke the silence. "You have been chosen," she said in a voice that was both commanding and oddly gentle. "Not by chance, but by fate. The spirits have spoken, and you are to be our heir." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He didn't understand. An heir? To what? To her tribe? To her? His confusion must have shown on his face because the queen continued. "You have something inside you, something the spirits have recognized. The blood of leaders flows through your veins. You will take my place one day, when the time comes." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Jackson couldn't speak at first. This was madness. He was just a cowboy, a man with no family, no future. And now this woman, this powerful queen, was telling him he was meant to lead her people. "I am not the man you think I am," he said finally, his voice low but steady. The queen studied him, her eyes unblinking. "I know who you are," she replied, "and I know what you've come from. But that doesn't matter now. The past is the past. What matters is the future." Jackson shook his head, still trying to grasp what she was saying. He had no idea what was going on, but something in her voice, something in her presence, made him feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption. It didn't make sense, but in the moment, he found himself wanting to believe her. The queen took a step closer, her hand gently resting on his arm. "You have much to learn," she said, "but you will learn quickly. You have no choice but to accept this path. The people have already spoken. You will be the one to guide them." Jackson felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He didn't know how to lead anyone, let alone a tribe of Apache warriors. But something deep inside him stirred. Maybe this was the chance he had been waiting for. Maybe this was the opportunity to redeem himself for all the mistakes he had made in his life. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he might be able to find a purpose. As the queen's words echoed in his mind, Jackson realized one thing. His journey had only just begun. As the days passed, Jackson found himself adapting to life among the Apache. The queen, who had introduced herself as Ahuli, a name that seemed to carry the weight of generations, wasted no time in teaching him the ways of her people. At first, he struggled to understand the customs and language, but slowly, the bond between them began to form. Ahuli's presence was commanding, yet there was something about her that made Jackson feel both respected and vulnerable at the same time. She was the type of leader who demanded respect, yet never hesitated to show compassion when it mattered most. Jackson spent his days learning the tribe's customs, the skills of the warriors, and the intricate balance that kept their society alive. His nights, however, were spent alone, contemplating his purpose. Every moment he spent with the tribe, he felt more like an outsider, yet the sense of duty and responsibility that Ahuli had instilled in him began to take root. There was one evening when Ahuli approached him at the fire, her expression softer than usual. She sat beside him, and for a long time, neither spoke. The crackling of the fire was the only sound in the still night. Finally, Ahuli broke the silence. "You're beginning to understand, Jackson," she said, her voice low but strong. "You've been through much, and yet, you have not broken. I see strength in you." Jackson didn't know how to respond. Strength? He had never seen himself as strong, just a man who had survived the wilderness. But as Ahuli spoke, he realized that perhaps he had underestimated himself. Maybe survival wasn't the same as strength. "What if I fail?" he asked, his voice betraying the uncertainty that had taken root inside him. Ahuli turned her gaze toward the stars above. "Failure is a lesson, Jackson. What matters is how you rise from it." Her words echoed in his mind long after the fire had burned out, and for the first time in weeks, Jackson felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, Ahuli gathered the tribe together for a meeting. Jackson stood at her side, his hands still unfamiliar with the weight of leadership. The tribe's elders were seated before them, their eyes filled with quiet anticipation. Jackson could feel their gaze on him, and for a moment, doubt clouded his mind. But then Ahuli spoke, her voice commanding the attention of the entire tribe. "Jackson will lead our people," she announced. "Not because of his blood, but because he has proven himself to be one of us." Jackson's heart raced as the elders nodded, their faces unreadable. Ahuli's words held power, but the weight of the tribe's expectations was almost overwhelming. How could he, a man who had lost everything, lead a group of people who had known hardship and triumph for generations? As the days turned into weeks, Jackson slowly began to see a change in himself. The anger and resentment that had once consumed him started to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose. Under Ahuli's guidance, he learned not only how to fight, but how to lead with honor. He learned that leadership wasn't about strength or power. It was about understanding the people you led, listening to their needs, and knowing when to stand firm and when to yield. Jackson's bond with Ahuli deepened as they spent more time together. He found himself drawn to her wisdom, her courage, and her unwavering belief in the tribe's future. She had always known that he was the one, the heir that the spirits had chosen, but Jackson still struggled to accept his role. He wasn't like the men who had led the tribe before. He was an outsider, a cowboy who had wandered into their world by accident. But as he stood at the head of the tribe, watching the warriors prepare for a journey that would take them deep into enemy territory, Jackson realized that he had finally found his place. This was his chance to prove himself. Not to Ahuli, not to the tribe, but to himself. The future of the Apache people now rested in his hands, and for the first time in his life, Jackson felt ready to lead them into it. The day of the journey had arrived. Jackson stood at the front of the tribe, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and dread. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, training with the warriors and learning the ways of the Apache. Ahuli, ever watchful, stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. The tribe's warriors were lined up, their faces painted with fierce symbols of strength, ready for the mission that lay ahead. Jackson had never felt the weight of leadership more than he did now. As the leader of the Apache people, he was about to lead them into unfamiliar territory. The task was simple yet dangerous. They were to journey deep into enemy lands to reclaim what had been taken from them years ago, a sacred artifact that belonged to their ancestors. Ahuli had trusted him with this responsibility, and Jackson knew he couldn't let her down. His gaze swept over the warriors, his warriors, and he felt a sense of belonging he had never felt before. These people had accepted him, had believed in him when he had nothing to offer but his resolve. The journey would take them across treacherous mountains, through dense forests, and into the heart of hostile lands. Jackson had been through many dangerous situations in his life, but nothing like this. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for honor, for the future of the tribe. The weight of his new position as leader was heavy, but it wasn't just the tribe's future that rested on his shoulders. It was his own redemption. As they began their trek, Jackson stayed close to Ahuli, listening to her advice, learning more with each step they took. She was not just a leader, she was a guide, someone who had lived through hardship and had emerged stronger. Jackson admired her, but he also feared her wisdom, her strength, and the way she seemed to see through him, like she knew the man he could be, even when he doubted himself. Days passed, and the landscape shifted. They climbed higher into the mountains, the air growing thinner and colder. Jackson's muscles ached from the long journey, but the sight of the warriors around him, moving with such precision and unity, kept him going. Ahuli never let him rest for too long, always pushing him to be better, to become the leader he was meant to be. As they approached the enemy's territory, tension filled the air. Jackson could feel it, the weight of the moment. The warriors began to whisper among themselves, their voices low and filled with determination. They knew the risks, but they trusted him to lead them. The night before they would enter enemy lands, Jackson sat alone by the fire, lost in thought. He stared into the flames, watching them dance and flicker, as if they held the answers to all his questions. How had he come to this point? How had he gone from a lost cowboy to the leader of a powerful Apache tribe? He had never asked for this role, never sought out this responsibility, but now it was his. And he had to see it through. As the fire crackled, Ahuli approached him quietly, her presence as commanding as always. She sat beside him, not saying anything at first, just watching the fire with him. After a moment, she spoke. "You're ready," she said softly. "You've learned more than you think. The warriors trust you. They follow you because they believe in you." Jackson turned to her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of doubt. But there was none. She was calm, confident as always. "I'm not sure I believe in myself," Jackson confessed, his voice low. "I've never been a leader. I've only ever known how to survive." Ahuli's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. "Survival is a start," she said. "But leadership is about more than just surviving. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. It's about seeing the bigger picture and making decisions that benefit the whole, not just one person." Jackson nodded, taking in her words. She was right. This wasn't just about him. This was about the Apache people, about the future they would create together. The following day, they crossed into enemy territory. The air was thick with tension, and Jackson could feel every movement. Every step they took was leading them closer to the confrontation they knew was coming. The warriors moved in silence, their eyes sharp, their bodies ready. Jackson could feel the weight of their expectations, but for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of purpose that steadied his nerves. They were no longer just a group of strangers bound by circumstance. They were a tribe, united under his leadership. As they approached the enemy camp, Jackson's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the moment of truth. They would either reclaim what was lost or face the consequences of their failure. Jackson took a deep breath, steadying himself. The future of the tribe rested on his shoulders, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The enemy camp was just ahead, nestled within a narrow valley surrounded by jagged rocks that seemed to scrape the sky. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke and the faint buzz of distant voices. Jackson stood at the front of the group, his heart pounding in his chest, every muscle in his body tensed, ready for the inevitable clash. The warriors behind him were silent, their movements as fluid and precise as a single entity. The tension was palpable, but it was not just the fear of battle that weighed heavily on Jackson's mind. It was the responsibility he carried, the heavy mantle of leadership that had been thrust upon him. The tribe followed him, and the thought of letting them down was almost more than he could bear. Ahuli's presence beside him offered little comfort. She was a tower of strength, a force to be reckoned with, and yet even she seemed focused, eyes scanning the terrain with a sharpness that Jackson could not quite match. Her silence spoke volumes. He knew she was waiting for him to act, to make the first move that would determine the outcome of their journey. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his position more than ever before. The future of the Apache people rested in his hands, and there was no turning back now. As they approached the edge of the enemy's camp, Jackson gave the signal to halt. The warriors behind him drew their weapons, the gleam of steel flashing in the morning sun. The battle was about to begin. Jackson's mind raced as he scanned the camp. It was poorly defended, a mixture of lazy guards and scattered tents. He could hear the muffled sounds of activity, the clink of tools, and the low hum of idle chatter. These men had no idea what was coming. Ahuli spoke softly beside him. "They are weak. They do not see us as a threat." Jackson nodded, the realization sinking in. This wasn't just about taking back what was theirs. This was about sending a message, about showing the strength of their tribe and the power of the Apache people. Without hesitation, Jackson led the charge. He rode forward, his horse moving like a streak of lightning through the camp. The warriors followed, their war cries echoing through the valley, a sound that would send chills down the spine of anyone who heard it. The enemy was caught off guard, their disorganized defense barely a challenge as the Apache warriors stormed the camp. Jackson fought with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. He didn't just strike his enemies. He was fighting for something much larger than himself. Every swing of his sword, every movement of his body, was a declaration of his new identity, his new role as leader. The battle raged on, but Jackson's focus never wavered. He knew what was at stake. Ahuli was at his side, as fierce and skilled as any warrior in the tribe. Together, they moved through the camp, cutting down any who dared to stand in their way. It didn't take long for the enemy to realize they were outmatched. Their resistance crumbled as the Apache warriors overwhelmed them, pushing them back and forcing them to surrender. Jackson stood in the center of the camp, panting, his body covered in sweat and blood. The battle was won, but it didn't feel like victory. The weight of what he had just done settled on him like a heavy cloak. He had led his people into battle, but was he truly ready to lead them into the future? Ahuli approached him, her expression unreadable. She said nothing at first, only studied him with the same intensity that she always did. Finally, she spoke. "You did well," she said, her voice steady. "The tribe sees you now. You have proven yourself." Jackson didn't know what to say. He had led the charge, but the cost of victory was greater than he had imagined. As the defeated enemy knelt before him, Jackson felt the sting of guilt. He had taken lives, and he could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of the darkness that came with leadership. The tribe gathered around him, their eyes filled with respect and admiration. But Jackson felt no sense of triumph. He had done what was necessary, but it had come at a price. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Jackson realized that his journey was far from over. He had earned the tribe's trust, but now he had to earn his own. The queen had chosen him, but the true test of leadership had only just begun. The days after the battle felt like a blur to Jackson. Despite the overwhelming victory, something deep inside him gnawed at him, keeping him awake at night. The tribe's respect for him had grown, but so had the weight of his role as their leader. The sense of purpose that had pushed him through the chaos of battle now seemed like a distant memory. Ahuli remained a constant presence at his side, guiding him with her wisdom, but even she seemed to sense the growing turmoil within him. The responsibility was heavier than he had anticipated, and Jackson began to wonder if he was truly cut out for the role of leader. He spent hours alone, away from the tribe, looking out over the vast plains that stretched before him, lost in thought. The land was both beautiful and cruel, and in many ways, it reflected his own state of mind. He had wanted redemption, and now that it was within his grasp, he wasn't sure what to do with it. His past, his mistakes, seemed to haunt him at every turn. One evening, as the sun began to set and painted the sky in shades of red and orange, Jackson sat by the campfire, his mind consumed with doubt. Ahuli joined him, her presence steadying him in a way he couldn't explain. Without a word, she handed him a wooden bowl filled with water, the firelight flickering in her eyes. Jackson took the bowl but didn't drink. He stared into the flames, his mind swirling. "You are troubled," Ahuli said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of experience. Jackson sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. I've led them into battle, yes, but that's just one part of being a leader. What happens next? What happens when the fighting stops and we have to rebuild?" Ahuli remained silent for a moment, allowing him to speak his fears. Then, she spoke, her words simple but piercing. "Leadership is not just about fighting. It is about guiding, about protecting what is ours, and about knowing when to listen." Jackson looked at her, his gaze meeting hers for the first time that night. "But how do I know if I'm doing the right thing? How do I know if I'm the right man for this?" Ahuli's eyes softened. "You don't need to know. That's the challenge. Leadership is not about knowing everything. It's about making the best decisions with the knowledge you have, even if they are difficult." Jackson nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. "And if I fail?" he asked, the fear of failure lingering in his voice. Ahuli smiled, a faint glimmer of warmth in her eyes. "If you fail, you learn. But you don't give up. You rise and try again." The simple truth in her words resonated with Jackson in a way he hadn't expected. He had been so focused on perfection, on being the perfect leader, that he had forgotten that it was okay to stumble, to learn from mistakes. As the days passed, Jackson began to embrace the role with a newfound sense of purpose. He no longer saw himself as an outsider, but as part of something greater. Under Ahuli's guidance, he learned how to lead with compassion, to listen to the needs of the tribe, and to make decisions that would shape their future. The challenges were far from over, but Jackson finally understood that he didn't have to do it alone. The tribe was with him, and together, they would face whatever came next. One morning, as Jackson stood before the tribe, preparing to address them, he felt a surge of confidence he hadn't experienced before. The doubts that had plagued him seemed to melt away, replaced by the understanding that leadership was not about having all the answers. It was about guiding others toward a better future. "We are stronger together," he said, his voice carrying across the camp. "This tribe is not just a group of people. It is a family, and as your leader, I will fight for you, protect you, and honor our traditions. But I need you to stand with me. Together, we will build a future for our people." The tribe responded with a cheer, their voices echoing across the land. And for the first time in a long while, Jackson felt that he was not just surviving. He was thriving. He was ready to lead them, not with the weight of his past, but with the strength of their future. The weeks that followed brought new challenges for Jackson and the tribe. The victory over their enemies had been decisive, but the real work was just beginning. As leader, Jackson knew that he had to ensure the stability of their people, and that meant more than simply defending their land. The Apache were a proud people, rich in tradition and customs, and Jackson had to prove himself worthy of the trust they had placed in him. Each day, he faced difficult decisions that would shape the future of his tribe. The strain of leadership weighed heavily on him, but with Ahuli at his side, guiding him, he began to see a clearer path. She taught him how to balance strength with compassion, to lead not just with authority, but with wisdom. He listened to the elders, learned the stories of their ancestors, and slowly began to understand the depth of the culture he had once been an outsider to. It was not an easy road. The tribe had enemies, both within and beyond their borders. And Jackson knew that his leadership would be tested in ways he hadn't yet imagined. One evening, as Jackson sat near the fire, lost in thought, Ahuli approached him. Her gaze was steady, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "Jackson," she said softly, "the tribe looks to you for strength, but you must not forget who you are." He turned to her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" Ahuli sat beside him, her voice calm but firm. "You have always been a survivor, but you are not just a man of the past anymore. You are a leader now, and you must think beyond yourself." Jackson's heart tightened. He had always been a man who focused on survival, on getting through the day. But now, he was responsible for the lives of many, and he knew that survival was no longer enough. It was about building something lasting, something that would ensure the future of the Apache people. The next day, Jackson called a meeting with the tribe's leaders. The air was thick with anticipation as he addressed them, his voice strong but filled with the weight of responsibility. "We have won our battle, but the true test is ahead," he said. "We must not only defend our land, but we must ensure the safety and prosperity of our people. Our enemies are not just those who stand against us. They are the forces of time and change that threaten to erode everything we hold dear." The tribe listened in silence, their eyes fixed on him. Jackson could feel the gravity of the moment, but he also felt something else, a sense of purpose he had never known before. Ahuli was right. It was no longer enough to survive. They had to thrive. Over the next few weeks, Jackson worked tirelessly, implementing strategies to strengthen the tribe's position. They forged alliances with neighboring tribes, established trade routes, and improved their defense systems. Jackson's leadership was put to the test as he navigated political alliances and made tough decisions that would impact the tribe for generations. There were moments of doubt, of course. There were times when Jackson questioned his abilities, when he felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. But each time, Ahuli was there to remind him of the strength within him. "You are not just a man, Jackson," she told him one night as they stood watching the stars. "You are the future of our people. Your strength lies not in your ability to fight, but in your ability to unite and protect." Those words stayed with him, and with each passing day, Jackson grew more confident in his role. He was no longer just a man trying to survive. He was a leader shaping the future of the Apache people. And as the seasons changed, so did the tribe. They grew stronger, more unified, and more resilient. Jackson had not just earned the respect of the tribe. He had earned his place as their leader. But as much as he had grown, he knew there was still much to be done. There would be new challenges ahead, new threats to face. But with the tribe united and his bond with Ahuli stronger than ever, Jackson felt ready for whatever came next. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt that he was walking the path he was meant to walk. The days passed, and Jackson's leadership was put to the test more than ever. The tribe had gained strength under his rule, and the bonds with neighboring tribes were beginning to solidify. Yet, with each new success came new threats. Word spread of the Apache's newfound unity, and it was not long before enemy forces began to move in, sensing an opportunity to destroy what had been built. Jackson had always known this day would come, but the pressure of facing it was immense. He could feel the weight of his decisions bearing down on him, and for the first time in a long while, he wondered if he had made the right choices. Ahuli, ever the steady presence at his side, noticed the change in him. The confident leader who had once faced the future without fear now seemed weighed down by doubt. One evening, as Jackson stood by the campfire, lost in thought, Ahuli approached him. Her gaze was sharp, yet kind, understanding the internal struggle he was facing. She did not need to ask him what was on his mind. She could see it in his eyes. "Jackson," she said softly, "you have already proven yourself more than you know. The tribe believes in you because they see what I see, the strength, the resolve. But strength does not come from perfection. It comes from knowing when to stand firm and when to bend." Jackson's brow furrowed as he met her gaze. "I've never been perfect," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But this is different. We've built something, and now it feels like it's all going to fall apart. How do we fight this? How do I lead them through something like this?" Ahuli's expression softened, and she stepped closer. "You lead with your heart, Jackson. It has always been your heart that has brought you this far. You have fought for your survival, and now you are fighting for something greater, your people. You will not let them down." Her words were like a balm to the wound of his doubt. Jackson nodded, taking in her wisdom. He knew she was right. He had spent so much time focusing on the weight of the crown, on the expectations of others, that he had lost sight of the most important thing, his connection to the tribe, his connection to his purpose. The next morning, Jackson called a gathering of the tribe's leaders. The air was thick with tension as they gathered around the fire. Jackson stood before them, his resolve steady. "The enemy is coming," he said, his voice strong. "But we will not cower. We will stand our ground, not just for our land, but for our future. Our people deserve to live in peace, and we will fight for that peace." The warriors around him nodded, their faces filled with determination. Jackson could feel the power of their unity, and in that moment, he realized something important. They were not just following him, they were standing with him. That made all the difference. As the days passed, Jackson and the tribe prepared for the coming battle. They fortified their positions, ensuring that every warrior knew their role. Jackson, though, was different now. He was no longer the man who had stumbled into this role by accident. He was the leader of the Apache, a man who had earned the respect of his people. When the enemy finally arrived, they found themselves facing a united tribe, ready to defend everything they had fought for. The battle was fierce, but Jackson was no longer consumed by fear. He fought with the strength and resolve of someone who had found his place in the world. He moved with precision, his every action fueled by the knowledge that he was not just fighting for himself, but for the people who believed in him. The tide of the battle began to turn in their favor, and soon, the enemy found themselves retreating. Jackson stood at the front of the charge, his heart pounding, his body aching from the exertion. But he could feel the victory in his bones. This was their moment, and it was his moment. As the enemy scattered, Jackson looked around at his warriors, their faces filled with pride. The tribe had fought together, and they had won together. Jackson knew that this was just one battle in a long war, but for the first time, he felt a sense of peace. He had led them through this, and he knew now that he was ready for whatever came next. The tribe celebrated their victory, but Jackson did not join in. Instead, he stood apart, his thoughts turning inward. He had learned much over the past few months. He had learned about strength, about leadership, about sacrifice. And most of all, he had learned that he was not just the leader of a tribe. He was the protector of their future, the one who would guide them through the storms ahead. The journey was far from over, but Jackson was no longer the uncertain man who had wandered into the Apache camp all those months ago. He was their leader now, and he would fight for them, for their future, for their survival. Months passed, and the Apache tribe, under Jackson's leadership, continued to thrive. The land they had fought so hard to protect was flourishing. The people were united, and Jackson had earned the trust of every warrior, elder, and child. He had come a long way from the uncertain cowboy who had stumbled into their world. He had not only earned his place among them, but he had become the leader they needed, a protector, a guide, and a symbol of their strength. Yet, even with all the victories and accomplishments, Jackson knew the true test of leadership was not in the battles fought or the land secured, but in the peace that followed. The tribe's future was no longer at risk, but Jackson understood that peace was fragile, and it was his responsibility to protect it. One evening, as the sun began to set over the mountains, Jackson found himself standing on the edge of the camp, looking out over the land they had fought to preserve. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of the earth and the promise of new beginnings. Ahuli joined him, her presence steady as always, and for a moment, they stood in silence, taking in the beauty of the world around them. "You have done it, Jackson," Ahuli said softly, her voice filled with pride. Jackson turned to her, a sense of gratitude filling his chest. "We have done it, Ahuli. Together." She smiled, but there was a depth to her expression, as if she could see something he had not yet realized. "You have become the leader you were meant to be. The tribe looks to you now, not just as a warrior, but as their protector and guide. The future is in your hands, but you will never be alone." Jackson nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had learned much during his time with the Apache, but the most important lesson had been this. Leadership was not about standing apart from the people, but about standing with them. It was about understanding their needs, their struggles, and their dreams. It was about building a future together, one that honored the past and embraced the possibilities of the future. As the days turned into weeks and the seasons changed, Jackson continued to lead the Apache with strength, wisdom, and compassion. He worked alongside the warriors, the elders, and the families, ensuring that the peace they had fought for remained intact. He did not seek glory or recognition, but the respect of the people he led. And as the years went by, Jackson's legacy grew, not as a conqueror, but as a leader who had brought his people together and guided them through the storms of life. One day, as he stood once again at the edge of the camp, looking out over the land he had fought to protect, Jackson realized that he had found his place in the world. He was no longer just a man trying to survive. He was a part of something greater, a family, a tribe, a people, and that was enough. Jackson turned back to the camp, where Ahuli was waiting for him. She smiled as he approached, and for the first time in a long while, Jackson felt a sense of peace settle in his heart. The journey had been long, but he had made it. He had found his purpose, and with it, the strength to protect the future of the Apache people. Together, they stood as one, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but with Jackson as their leader, the tribe would face it with hope, unity, and strength.